Yeah, I work for an organization called Conservation Legacy. We're a nonprofit with a number of programs. I'm based with our Southwest Conservation Corps program out of Durango, Colorado. We also have a program down in Arizona that I'll talk a little bit about called the Arizona Conservation Corps. It's one of the crews that Sarah is working with Sarah and Anna that just spoke. Our mission as a nonprofit is to empower individuals to positively impact their lives, their communities, and the environment. And that's really kind of the meat of the presentation I want to give today is really quantifying some of those impacts. I'm going to just start with a bit of an overview of the Colorado River Basin as a whole. I'm probably speaking to the choir a little bit here, and that people are pretty familiar. But even as I put together this presentation, I was surprised by some of the facts. And so I'll go through these pretty quick. It's a really important watershed. It's pretty long. A lot of people depend on it. A lot of our food, especially in the winter, comes from this watershed. It's humans, and it supports a lot of unique species. I won't read through all of these numbers. And just a bit of a map for familiarity, broken down by the upper basin and the lower basin. And later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about a few partnerships that I've had the pleasure to work with for the last few years. And Greg this morning mentioned the Dolores River Restoration Partnership. Anna and Sarah just presented on work they're doing down in the Verde as a part of V-Work. Sean Stone is speaking later about work on the Gila Watershed Partnership. And I also work in the Escalante River over in Utah, and I'll just point those out if I can make this work. So Dolores River is right here, Colorado into Utah. Escalante is right here. The Verde River, Sarah and Anna just talked about, is right here. And then the work on the Gila that's happening is really over in this area. And that's just a subset of all the work that I know a lot of you are probably involved in throughout the basin. I'm just going to speak specifically about the partnerships that I've had the great opportunity to work with and some of the evaluation results we've been able to see through this work. So the problems in the Colorado River Basin are pretty substantial. I guess I should say challenges versus problems. But, a lot of the water is diverted for agriculture. We have a huge amount of dams. It says 6 major, but I'll show a slide in a minute that really shows the impacts of dams and diversions. It's over allocated as a whole. We've got a growing human population and some, I guess I should say, in terms of climate change, maybe projected instead of expected. It's still a bit of an unknown. And as most of you know, with the exception of last year's event, the river really no longer reaches the sea. So it's fraught with some challenges. This is just a neat slide. Has anybody here seen this slide before? Pretty cool diagram of the challenges in the basin, where the big buckets are our reservoirs, scaled down to from really large like Lake Powell and Lake Mead down to some of the smaller ones, and then you've got the kind of water taps out there. That's the aqueducts and the transbasin diversions within the basin, and then we've kind of got the wildlife and plants sort of floating around the edges, kind of wondering, is there going to be enough for us? As I get focused down here, we'll talk a little bit about habitat. So generally, again, preaching to the choir, condition of western rivers, riparian area, it's that thin green line. I think most of the people here know that, but it's not always a common term that folks understand, maybe outside of practitioners and scholars. We've got all those dams that have various impacts. I'm not going to dive into that too deeply either, but altered duration, flows, temperatures for fish, and the timing of the flows, not necessarily always in flux and in sync with when the native vegetation is putting its seeds out. We've had a huge loss of riparian habitat, since we've settled this country as Anglo-Americans and others. And then, generally this stat is one I love to use, that 1% of our western lands are riparian and 80% of our wildlife depends on them. So that, to me, really hits home about why what I'm going to talk about next is really important. Some of the causes of habitat degradation. This slide over here is actually not a before and after or anything like that, but a fence line. Just showing some of the impacts of grazed versus non-grazed. And you can imagine that in this kind of scenario, that it really opens up a lot of habitat for invasive species in that overgrazed situation. The hydrologic manipulation due to dams and diversions is a pretty important impact as well. We've got climate, drought, and of course competing needs with a sort of an exclamation mark, I think, around our use as humans as some of the degradation factors. And some of those have set up a situation where invasive species have been able to get a competitive edge throughout the Colorado River Basin and beyond. And some examples of what invasive species can do in some of the areas that you may be familiar with in the Southwest. Russian olive here exemplified as taking over. That's that sort of sage-colored area in the Chinle Wash, overcrowding the rivers, making it difficult to access, et cetera, et cetera. A real problem in the West as well as tamarisk, as again, most of you know. And these species have a real competitive edge. So they don't have a lot of native predators because they come from somewhere else. They produce a lot of seeds, tamarisk being a real champion, especially where the beetle isn't involved. They can outcompete a lot of our native vegetation in terms of their ability to grow in poor soils or highly saline soils. Reach deeper into the landscape to pull water out where maybe a cottonwood or other plants can't. Overshade and outcompete native vegetation, and then can increase soil salinity as well as outcompete through allelopathy, which is kind of a chemical that's released in the soil that kills other plants. And so it's a real problem, and I just put this in because it exemplifies. Wow, this is a picture over in Escalante where this took a whole crew of Utah Conservation Corps folks. An entire day to cut down 3 trees. Pretty incredible problem. And how do we work on this problem? And no, it's not sending out monkeys like Wizard of Oz to solve that issue. But every once in a while we get Conservation Corps members that might resemble a monkey. So, the real key has been working together, as Sarah and Anna exemplified and teeing me up a little bit here for this presentation. Working together across the landscape is really the key to success. We can leverage funding, we can bring in various workforces, we can hit the problem across public and private lands and erase some of the boundaries that exist, at the same time protecting endangered species and really making an impact beyond sort of heavy use sites to improve habitat at a watershed scale. And how, in my role, I've been supporting a multitude of conservation corps working within those collaborative partnerships I mentioned. And just a few logos for you. But, the conservation corps are youth development programs partnering with AmeriCorps, which is a national service program to provide job training and service opportunities for youth and young adults. And it's really training the next generation of land and water stewards in our country at a time where I think it's a very needed approach. And so these various partnerships are all working with a number of conservation corps, boots on the ground. What I want to mention as well is that there's also, this integrated pest management approach across most of these partnerships. That many of the partnerships work with mechanical contractors on the ground to accomplish projects, and we have biological control agents in the mix as well that you have been and will continue to hear about throughout this conference. So it's by no means the only workforce on the ground, but and I'm biased a little bit, I think it's a real important. So I have quantified some of the accomplishments ecologically here in really one slide from the various partnerships, and it's a bit of a moving target to get these numbers because we have crews on the ground currently. And we're still developing, a lot of annual reports from last year's work, but these are in the various ballparks of being pretty close to accurate, I will say. And what's I think impressive here is 282 river miles in total have been improved since about 2009. And it's important to note that these various partnerships have have initiated projects at different times. You can see the numbers for the Gila are quite lower than some of the other partnerships. They've just been going for a couple of years, and they also have a very specific focus on Southwest willow flycatcher habitat, whereas the three partnerships above in the Verde, Escalante, and Dolores are really heavy into let's hit the tamarisk, let's hit the Russian olive, and knock it out. So there's some differences between the partnerships, but 282 miles. Who's been down the Grand Canyon in the boat? Woo! That's about the length of Lee's Ferry to Lake Mead. It takes about 20 to 25 days to float. So just to contextualize that distance, it's a significant number in a handful of years in terms of accomplishments. Excuse me. The acres treated, over 10,000 acres. We've got a higher number of acres monitored. I think it's great to see that number is higher. It means a lot of these sites have been revisited. Not that we're monitoring always more acres than we're treating, but also we're monitoring some of the biocontrol only sites where treatment hasn't taken place, and some of the pre-project monitoring to get some baseline data out there. I think it's impressive to note that there's a lot of monitoring going on to follow up the accomplishments and the initial treatment of getting this stuff out. Indeed, also the acres of retreatment in 10,000 as well, right up there with the acres of initial treatment. So we're getting back in there with the crews and various workforces to make sure we stop the problem in its tracks. And then this last number here is where I'm going to focus for the rest of the presentation. And it's very much heavy on who we serve in terms of working with young adults through Conservation Corps programs. So 837 people have been able to work within these watershed partnerships to make impacts on the riparian habitat restoration as a part of these job training programs. And that's pretty impressive in a 6-year time frame. And we've done some work to quantify that. I'm going to dive in to some of these numbers. So, of these AmeriCorps members, and again, AmeriCorps is a national service program. It provides, a living stipend and also an education award for the completion of what they call a term of service. And there's different terms of service and different AmeriCorps programs. I'm not going to dive in too much, but I'm happy to talk with anybody about it afterwards. But, we provide this education piece, and that's the training. So 108,810 hours of training have been provided to these members to help them build their resumes and understand the work that they're undertaking. And then these education awards, over $1 million in awards. So a member completes it. This award is specific to paying student loans, going back to college, taking a wilderness first aid or wilderness first responder, EMT, a NOLS course, things like that. So the program is really encouraging further education, and that's a pretty significant number there, and it's also a conservative number based on the minimum term of service. So a few years back, we started strategizing how we know our programs have impacts. How can we get some stats to back up these impacts? There's more than just we cut down an acre of tamarisk and I had a job where I learned some stuff kind of thing, right? So this center is the centerpiece here in this slide. It's one of those word puzzles where the heavier weighted words in the surveys come out larger. So you can kind of see the key through the evaluation: learn, fun, experience, conservation, work, people. Those are some of the heavy values in the mix here. And the evaluation basically took our core members and contrasted them with a non-core comparison group of the same size, and looked at a number of different aspects of the experience that people have out in the field. And so one of those was the program components. And you can see here I kind of put the top in red, but all these components weighted pretty heavily to participants. But, the project setting, and we've got some of the best project settings in these watersheds, gaining new knowledge, learning new skills, and having a meaningful work project. And, it's important to say that all of these crews were on the ground for at least 8 weeks doing exclusively riparian restoration work to be able to fill out these surveys. And we see some change. We did some pre and post surveying, some change scores, contrasting the comparison group. We can see that there's a heavy interest in pursuing conservation related careers and ability to get a job. And some of the percentages, sort of our talking points from the survey: 174% higher confidence to get a job after serving with the Conservation Corps, 487% higher interest in pursuing a conservation-related career after serving with the Conservation Corps. So these are great things. I've got a few more of these to run through, and then I'll be done. So the growth in community engagement, 350% more than the comparison group. Environmental engagement, 173% higher. Teamwork, we put people out working as a team to accomplish a project, and really there's no better proving grounds for young adults than getting out there. And leadership is a huge one out of all of these, 1,267% higher than the comparison group. Pretty impressive numbers. The other ones here of note, self-responsibility. I take responsibility for my actions. 600% higher than the comparison group. Grit, that's kind of like perseverance, able to cope with rough situations, say like cutting thorny Russian olive while you're waiting in a stream, or getting stabbed by tamarisk and dealing with these crazy thickets. And then the critical thinking, 211% higher than the comparison group, and then communication. So all of these scores are just super impressive to me in a time where really I think we're seeing a challenge in the younger folks. I remember first seeing my first computer in about sixth grade, and now I heard on the radio on the way up here, people are gauging the status of their relationship based on like when they share their Netflix password, or like asking, relationship advice to Siri. Like things are changing in our world significantly, and there aren't many programs that are putting people outside doing hard work, learning how to work together, doing good stuff, and challenging them. And so, again, I'm biased, but I think that what's happening here and the results that we see are really impressive. And it wouldn't be possible without, the 30 partners in the Verde and similar amounts of federal, public, private entities and agencies working together to really accomplish these tasks. And that how we do this work and who we engage is just important as what we're doing. And that's kind of the take-home message I want to make here. And a couple of next steps, we're looking to continue this evaluation. In this year, we've already got all our surveys back. We just have to get through the nuts and bolts. Assessing potential for impacts of ecosystem resiliency and climate change, because those are hot topics for the future. These partnerships specifically are going to engage about 140 folks again this year. Continue to push those ecological successes through the monitoring, and then hopefully that you all continue to support 21st Century Conservation Service Corps, which will provide more opportunities for the kind of growth I've been talking about.
Those are some staggering statistics. Do we have questions for Mike? Hi, Mike. Do you have any statistics on who's absorbing your workforce? Where they're going?
Yeah, at one point it used to be a lot of the agencies. And, we've seen sort of a lack in seasonal agency jobs in the last number of years, which has been a real challenge for moving those folks up the career ladder. What we do see is, members getting involved where they can in seasonal positions, moving over into, research opportunities, and then also developing these sort of career pathways within our own programs. And Anna and Sarah had mentioned like how they have field staff on. So, it's a small percentage, but we're working those core members up into internship positions, into field supervisor positions, through those roles as we can as partnerships and organizations. But, it's also very difficult to track where everybody goes. Keeping track of young adults is a challenge. The question was, do I have similar statistics on how the vets are using this program, mostly on the Verde River? I don't have specific stats for those, Tim, although that could be a follow-up for this year. I think within the realm of possibility for sure. Jim was asking about what the comparison group. Typically, they're college students. We've outsourced this the evaluation, and the comparison group component is one piece of that, but they're mostly just college students compared to people working within our programs. Well,
can you repeat that?
Yeah. So Amanda asked, what proportion of the Corps members are either in college? Is that right? And that really depends on the program. You know, we work with a variety of conservation corps. Some of them are very focused on serving underserved youth. Others, you know, have a bit of more bent to looking at college aged. I can say, you know, from our organization, about 50% of the Corps members from the Southwest Conservation Corps have some college education or have graduated, but that's going to be different for each program because we each have a different recruiting strategy and a different focus. So again, I could come up with some numbers over time, but I don't have them off the top of my head.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mike.